It's really an honor and a privilege to be here with this esteemed group of entrepreneurs from all over the country. You are people who, at least in my impression, people who don't work the 9 to 5, but rather people who choose to take the bull by the horns. That you know that your success is the product of your efforts, and it's not about clocking in and clocking out. It's about killing something and bringing it home. It's about making it happen. It's living proactively as opposed to merely living reactively. And that's a message which I thought I wanted to share with you today as we take on the theme of a new year, new you. Because a new year, Rosh Hashanah, is not just a new beginning. It's not just that we have another year, but rather that we have to start off far further ahead than we've ever been before. We've got to be able to be in a different space, mindset, heart set, soul set, because we know that our thoughts drive our actions and our actions drive our success. It all starts in our head and in our hearts. And that is the point that I'd like to reset today in a whole new frame of reference. I'd like to start off with one of the most alarming hostage crises in Jewish history. It happened about 2,800 years ago when King David was on the run from his own father-in-law, King Saul, who was trying to kill him. King David sought refuge amongst the Philistines, who were the enemy of King Saul. And in a story which is recounted to us in the prophets, the book of Samuel 1, chapter 30, we learn about how David went out with his 600 men to try to assist the Philistines in their wars to show loyalty. Yet they didn't trust him, so they sent him back. When David and his 600 men came back to their village, where they had their wives and their children and where they were living securely, they found that the village of Tsiklag was burned to the ground. All of their wives and children were taken captive by the Amalekites, the nation of Amalek. This is the nemesis of the Jewish people. And the men were devastated. King David himself, the future king of Israel, was crestfallen. It was the darkest moment in his life because here his own men threatened to stone him. David's own men were threatening to kill him for the negligence, for the thoughtlessness of having left the village of Tsiklag unarmed, unprotected, for having falsely trusted that they were safe while they had gone on their 3-day journey. And I challenge you to think for a moment how you might have reacted if you were in David's shoes at that moment. If you were responsible for these 600 families, if you were the king and you had failed your people, how would you react? How many of us would turn to alcohol or to drugs or to depression or maybe to the blame game, to start blaming someone else, to find the reason, to find someone to blame, but not David. David's response was astounding. I'm going to quote the verse that says, "Vayitchazek David b'Hashem Elokav," and David strengthened in Hashem, his God. What David proceeded to do was to write down, he penned a psalm. You know, the book of Psalms, Tehillim, includes 150 psalms, which are mostly attributed to King David. He proceeded to write down, to pen Psalm 27, LeDavid Hashem Oyer V'ishi, to David, my Hashem is my light and my salvation. This was the psalm that he wrote, and a psalm that became so famous that ever since the sages instituted that during the entire period of the high holidays, from 30 days before Rosh Hashanah until the 7th day of Sukkot, that's roughly 50 days, we recite Psalm 27 twice a day. Once in the morning and once in the afternoon in the Mincha service. And the question is why? Well, what is it about this Psalm 27 that is so critical and critically important for us right around the time of the new year that we need to somehow be reflecting on this psalm, that we need to be remembering this psalm, that we need to be remembering David's reaction. And I'll share with you in a few moments what happened in the rest of the story of King David and his attempt to rescue the hostages that were taken captive from Ziklag by the Amalekites. Our sages explain that the reason why, in a cryptic explanation, they tell us that the reason why this psalm was chosen is because the psalm makes reference to the three major holidays of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, which comes right after, when we live in the Sukkah for 8 days. When it says that David Hashem Eiri, God is my light, it refers to Rosh Hashanah. When it says God is my salvation, it refers to Yom Kippur. And then later on in the psalm, it says, for God will protect me in his Sukkah. That is a clear reference to the festival of Sukkot. Now, we can understand and appreciate the reference to Sukkah. We can even appreciate the reference to Yom Kippur as God is my salvation on the day of judgment. But why, pray tell, is Rosh Hashanah connected to the day of my light? Why is the David Hashem Eiri, God is my light, why is that a reference to Rosh Hashanah? And here lies the most beautiful explanation, which reframes our perception of absolutely everything, because Rosh Hashanah is not just the day of judgment, but rather it serves as a lighthouse to illuminate the darkness of our lives, to alleviate our anxieties, to mitigate our stress and our tension, and to empower us with the tools that we need to experience success beyond our wildest dreams and expectations. You see, Rosh Hashanah is not only the day of judgment. Rosh Hashanah is also the day that commemorates the event when God created heaven and earth and all that's in it 5,786 years ago. This is the day of creation. And when we look at the universe, when we look at creation, we cannot help but be astounded when you realize that planet Earth is suspended in exactly the right distance from the sun. A little closer, we'd all be incinerated. A little further, we'd all be frozen. It's incredible. It's mind-blowing to realize the precision within the sophisticated details of creation. When you look even into something as simple as the human being, a human body, just one being in all of the universe, there's no camera in the world that is as advanced as the human eye. The iPhone 17 doesn't hold a candle to the capabilities and the capacities of the ordinary human eye of a one-day-old baby. And the most advanced hearing aid, hearing aids come in very handy in shuls, by the way. If you don't like the rabbi's sermon, you just switch the channel. It's fantastic. But when it comes to hearing aids, they don't hold a candle to what the power and the abilities and the capacities of the human ear is capable of harboring. The human being is just so extraordinarily sophisticated. When you think about photosynthesis, and you think about osmosis, and you think about the human digestive system and the reproductive system. I mean, think about it for a moment. Before you even eat food, you're just thinking about the food. Your mouth begins to salivate. Why is your mouth salivating? Because it's producing enzymes that will assist the food to be digested even before the teeth break it down, even before the stomach juices are able to break it down into its smaller parts. The enzymes of the saliva are already digesting the food. This is why Maimonides tells us that you're not supposed to drink water before you eat a meal. Why not? Because if you drink the water, then you're washing down the saliva, which is there in order to break down the food. God created us in such an amazing way that we're digesting the food even before it even enters our mouth. When we look at life from this perspective, from the Rosh Hashanah perspective, when we look at life from the approach that God is the creator of every detail of this universe, how single part of this world has a purpose, we're forced to conclude that we too were created on purpose. And we're forced to come to the conclusion that there is absolutely no mistakes in the world around us. Everything happens for a reason. I'm never alone. I have no reason to be afraid. But with trust in God, I'm able to illuminate my path. Rosh Hashanah serves as the lighthouse that opens up our eyes, giving us the strength to take on the challenges that inevitably stand in our pathway. When we look at Somebody once came to his Rebbe. His Rebbe's name was Reb Mordechai of Chernobyl. And he said to him, life is way too difficult. He's struggling. He can't keep up. It's way too stressful. Too many problems, financial headaches, all sorts of trouble. Reb Mordechai Chernobyl told him an answer. He gave him a response about it. He gave him a metaphor, a story of a guy who had earned a sum of money. He earned 1,000 ruble, and he was traveling back home in order to start a business with the monies that he had earned. And on the way home, he had to stop over with Shabbos. He stopped over in an inn on the side of the road. And he had no choice but to deposit this pouch with 1,000 ruble in the hands of his innkeeper. But all Shabbos long, he was stressed out. Am I going to get the money back? Is she going to steal it? Is he going to deny it? Finally, as soon as Shabbos ended, right after Havdalah, the person, the worker goes over to the innkeeper asking for his money back, and she dutifully hands him back the pouch. And he's very happy to see that there's still 1,000 ruble in there, but he seems to be rummaging. He's searching for something. The innkeeper says to him, "What are you looking for? I gave you the pouch." He says there was a kopek in here. There was a little tiny coin, like, 5 cents that was here too, and he's looking for it as well. Explained the Reb Mordechai Chernobyl. He said, in the same way as this Jew who was concerned about the little kopek, when in fact he had received his 1,000 ruble already. We tend to have faith that God is the master of the world. We tend to believe that God created heaven and earth and that God is in charge of the Grand Canyon and the Swiss Alps and Mount Everest and everything else. We believe that God can sustain 7 or 8 billion mouths. But when it comes to myself, can God provide for me? Can God really solve my problem? Here we start worrying about the little kopek. Here we start developing a concern and anxiety, when in reality, if you put things into the proper perspective, you'd say, listen, if God can provide for the 8 billion mouths out there in the world, then I'm sure that I'm not going to be too much of a problem for him as well. Modern psychologists describe this problem with a name. They actually give it a name. And when you're able to name something, it enables us to disarm this condition in our mindsets. It's called negativity bias. As human beings, we have a natural inborn negativity bias. This was actually proven in a fascinating experiment by the FBI, a social experiment. Gil Zamora is an artist. You know one of these forensic artists for the FBI that, when you see a criminal and you don't have a picture, you've got to describe what the criminal looks like, and the forensic artist will draw a picture. So Gil Zamora, this FBI forensic artist, was placed in a room, and he had 10 women sit behind the screen one at a time. And each one of these women had to describe themselves to him so that he can draw a self-portrait of this person, which he couldn't see behind the screen, as they described themselves to the artist. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to the woman, a stranger was allowed to see each one of these women for like 30 seconds. And that stranger also later on was asked to describe each one of those women one at a time to the forensic artist. What came out was amazing. Each one of these women created a self-portrait with Gil Zamora that was far less flattering than the one created by the stranger. Because this image, the perception that we have of ourselves is far worse than what other people think about us. That's the negativity bias that we need to be able to overcome when we are trying to take on a new year, a new you, as we take on our challenges, our headaches, our obstacles, our problems. We've got to come in with a Rosh Hashanah mindset, realizing that God didn't just create every detail of the world, but God actually maintains every detail of the world. And if so, God is able to maintain my life as well, to provide for me, to give me the happiness that I seek, if we're only able to overcome that negativity bias. This past Sunday, I buried one of our members in New York. He was a young man in his early 40s who passed away. He lived a very difficult life. He had special needs, and he was nonverbal until he was 6 years old. At the funeral, his mother told me that he didn't speak until he was 6 years old. When was the first time that he spoke? The family was at a public swimming pool. And at one point, a strange woman came over to the mother, and she said, "You won't believe what your son, is that your son? You won't believe what your son just said to me. He said F words, and he said all sorts of curses to me because he says that I pushed him, and I didn't really push him." The mother hears this. She said, "Did he really say that?" She was so excited that her son had said something, that he had spoken. Tell me exactly what he said. Tell me again. This wasn't exactly the reaction that this unhappy woman was expecting. But later on, she went over to her son. She said, Michael, I'm so happy that you were speaking. But if you're able to speak, then why didn't you speak until now? True story. So he says, until now, everything was okay. Now he had something to complain about. So he spoke up. Right? We tend to speak when something's wrong, when something's amiss. But when things are good, you ask someone how their day's going, it's okay. But if they're having a bad day, boy, will you be sure you'll be hearing about it, because we have this negativity bias. And this is something which we need to be able to overcome. We need to be able to scale as we take on a mindset of Rosh Hashanah, in the mindset of King David's, the David Hashem Oiri, that God is my light. When we're able to recognize that God is my lighthouse, it illuminates everything in the world around us. To realize that God is the creator, God is the master of every detail of our lives. With that approach, we're able to realize that God can solve my problems as well. It's a very encouraging mindset. It's called Emunah. This is stage one of a very important process that I want to share with you. Emunah means faith. It means believing that even if I don't know what's going on, God has a plan. He knows what's going on, and it's going to be okay. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, what's going to happen if I'm already in trouble? What's going to happen if I'm already in a crisis, if I'm already in a very difficult situation, if I'm already in an illness or a difficult marriage or a relationship that's going nowhere or a dead-end job, or maybe there's a war going on or there's a hostage crisis going on? What am I going to do to be able to overcome that problem? And here, the Torah teaches us this most encouraging, exciting, and electrifying mindset, which changes it all. The Torah tells us that God is your mirror, M-I-R-R-O-R, a mirror, like a mirror reflection. How we relate to God is how God relates to us. And the Torah tells us that when we have absolute trust in God, not just faith, but absolute trust in God, then God reciprocates in kind with an absolute flow of the blessings that we need. In other words, God treats us the way we treat him. It's measure for measure. So when we have blind trust in God, without calculating if God is capable of solving our problems, then God reciprocates in kind, blessing us with the blessings that we need, without calculating if we deserve the blessings that we're asking for. This is called a beautiful mindset. It's called, in Yiddish, tracht gut wird sein gut. 5 words in Yiddish. Think good, and therefore it will be good. This is not just, feel good self-help stuff. This is actually an advanced spiritual mechanism based upon the mirror doctrine. But it's based upon the doctrine that God reciprocates in kind. When we have blind trust in God, then God gives us a blind blessing in return. And this is exactly what King David did that day when he discovered that the women and children were taken captive and their village was burned to the ground. David's 2 wives, Avinoam and Abigail, both were taken captive. Instead of falling into depression, instead of blaming someone else, David recites the psalm that he penned, Psalm 27, and then with the absolute trust in God, with these words, God is my light and my salvation. I have no reason to fear my enemies. They have no capacity to be able to challenge me. Only God carries me. These are the words of the Psalm 27. It's with this approach that David confronts the Amalekites without fear. And David succeeds in rescuing every last hostage from those 600 families, bringing them back home alive. In fact, David was so successful in rescuing those hostages that they also brought back the spoils of war from the Amalekites that they massacred. And now David had such a surplus of resources that he was able to actually send out those resources to all the Jewish communities around, increasing his popularity and paving the way for David ultimately to become the monarch. This story of King David is inspiring in the ancient past. And it might be, intriguing, thought-provoking, but I want to share with you an amazing modern application of this story. Exactly 2 summers ago, a young woman in Israel in her 20s, her name is Sapir Cohen from Kiryat Ata in Israel, suddenly had that gut feeling that something bad was about to happen. Something really bad was about to happen. So she went to her doctors and the specialists, and they said, nope, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. But she couldn't quell this feeling of anxiety that was in her kishkes. She couldn't get over it. One day she comes across a video on YouTube where a rabbi was saying that a person who recites Psalm 27, this is the end of the summer, right? It was 30 days before Rosh Hashanah when we start to recite Psalm 27 twice a day. The rabbi said on YouTube that if any person who says Psalm 27 every day, twice a day for 50 days, will be spared from any harm. Sounds like a good deal. So she decided, she felt so strongly that something bad was going to happen. She took that upon herself. Psalm 27 twice a day for 50 days. The very last day which you recite the psalm is the 7th day of Sukkot. Hoshana Rabbah, it's called. The very next day, she went to visit her boyfriend. His name is Sasha Trupanov in a kibbutz in the south of Israel called Kibbutz Nir Oz. That morning was the morning of October 7th. Both Sapir, as well as her boyfriend Sasha, were taken hostage into Gaza by the monsters of Hamas. They were separated, all the while that Sapir was in Gaza captivity, in the tunnels. All she could think of was that psalm that by now she had memorized, Psalm 27, which is an affirmation of this mindset, not just emunah, which is faith. It's the next level. It's bitachon, it's trust. Emunah means faith. I believe that whatever God is doing, he knows what he's doing, and even if I don't understand. But bitachon is trust, that I trust that God will give me the result that I need. That was the approach of David as he went to bring back the hostages from Tziklag. He had no space for emunah, where whatever happens, happens. No, bitachon means that I trust that God will give me the result that I desire. And that's the emotion that David captures in Psalm 27. That was the emotion that Sapir Cohen had memorized over those 100 times reciting the psalm over those 50 days. All the time in her captivity, she kept on reviewing in her mind from memory Psalm 27. Her captors described her. They said to her, there's like a light that surrounds you. They couldn't explain what it was. Miraculously, Sapir was released in a hostage exchange 55 days after October 7th. But her boyfriend, Sasha, remained in captivity for hundreds of days. If you remember when Noah Argamani was rescued, when Noah Argamani was rescued in that very daring raid in inside of Gaza, it was like the Entebbe raid. They went in and they rescued Noah Argamani and another 2 hostages. One of them was Sasha Trupanov, her boyfriend. They were now reunited. And just a few days ago, Sasha and Sapir announced their engagement in Rishon LeZion in Israel. Here you have a story of someone who took the faith and the trust, the emunah, faith and the trust, bitachon, of King David and applied it in our modern times today as well. And I want to give you one final example. And that is from a story that happened during this very recent years, during this Trump presidency, when the most famous butcher, kosher abattoir in America, the biggest kosher abattoir in America, was out of Postville, Iowa. It was run by a Chabad person. His name is Shalom Mordechai, Shalom Moshe Rabashkin is his name. Shalom Mordechai Rabashkin is his name. Rabashkin. And about 10 years ago, they were employing, more than 10 years, maybe about 10 years ago, they were employing illegal aliens in their massive abattoir. In a sting that happened under the Obama presidency, what happened was he was arrested and he was put in jail for a massive prison sentence of 27 years. He was put in prison for 27 years, about 10 times the amount of what an average person would be put in jail for committing a crime of that nature. It made no sense. There was tremendous anti-Semitic undertones. The judge that sentenced him was known to have anti-Semitic issues, but he was put in jail for 27 years, and he really had no hope of being released. But during his entire time in the jail, Shalom Mordechai Rabashkin kept on repeating to himself, like Sapir Cohen, he was before Sapir Cohen, but he was applying the doctrine of blind trust, of absolute trust. Remember the mirror doctrine? God treats us as we treat him. And even when you think there's no hope, that's not your problem. Our job is to trust blindly in God without calculating if God is able to solve our problem. And then God reciprocates, reflects like a mirror, where God blesses us without calculating if we deserve it or not. So that's what Shalom Mordechai Rabashkin did during his time in jail. He was in jail for a couple years, 3-4 years maybe, until President Trump became president the first time. And soon after he became president, in that first Hanukkah, the president suddenly announced that he was commuting the sentence of Shalom Mordechai Rabashkin. When Shalom Mordechai Rabashkin came out of jail in this miraculous release, he announced his message to the world, to the Jewish world was in shock. You know, we were so upset that he was in jail. He has 9 children, one of them has special needs, and to so heartlessly throw him in jail for such a long sentence made no sense. When he came out, he said 3 things. Aleph, Beis, Gimel. Aleph, Bet, Gimel. Aleph, Beis, Gimel stands for 3 words. Aleph is emunah, faith. Bet is bitachon, trust. And then Gimel is geula, redemption, salvation. That is the sequence of Jewish history, of Jewish mysticism, of how we are able to scale our mountains, how we are able to overcome our obstacles. Emunah, faith. Bitachon, trust, the bet, and the Gimel, geula, is redemption. Remember, the bitachon is not just, trust is not just the lack of fear. Trust is the infusion of confidence. It is being absolutely relaxed, being calm, no anxiety, no fear that the deal won't close. No, you're coming in knowing that the multi-million-dollar listing that you're dealing with, it's going to find a buyer, that there's going to be, the sale will go through, the funding will happen, commissions will be paid, everything's going to be fine, as long as you come in with zero anxiety, because if you have some degree of anxiety, then you don't have trust. Having trust is like being pregnant. You're either in or you're out. You can't be half pregnant. You can't have half trust. You got to have absolute trust in God. And when you're able to reach that degree, then you scale the heights of King David, who was able to bring the hostages back from Ziklag. You can scale the heights of Sapir Cohen, who languished in the Gaza dungeons of Hamas, finding her freedom just 55 days later. And we see the same story in Shalom Mordechai Rabashkin just a few years ago, who today is walking around freely, telling the world this message of Aleph Bet Gimel. I want to say to you, friends, that you may choose to dismiss what I'm saying as wishful thinking. And you have every right to do so. Whether you say you can or you say you cannot, you're right. God has empowered us with the most extraordinary gift of the freedom of choice, the freedom to be able to chart our own destinies. Rosh Hashanah is the day that we realize that a world without man, without Adam and Eve, is a world without purpose. Rosh Hashanah is the day that we realize that God needs us in order to make the world meaningful. We are the masters of our own destiny, and that becomes profoundly personal, extraordinarily meaningful, and close to home when we look at Rosh Hashanah through the lens of King David's Psalm 27, when we look at Rosh Hashanah as our light, the lighthouse that illuminates the darkness, recognizing God's presence in every part of our lives, how God is waiting in the wings of our lives for us to invite him on stage. God will perform for us as much as we allow him to do so. Somebody once asked the Kotzker Rebbe, where is God? And instead of giving him some philosophical response, the Kotzker's Rebbe's answer was classic. He said, where is God? God is wherever you let him in. He is wherever you let him in. And the question is, how deep within your heart are you willing to allow God in? Will you let him into the entrance hall and the family room? Or do you have the courage to bring God into the bedroom, into the room that you don't want to show anybody, into the bank account? Can you bring God into the deepest, darkest basement of your life? Because if we only have the courage to do so, then God will match us measure for measure. Mir, doctrine. Aleph, Beis, Gimel. Emuna, faith. Bitachon, trust, leads us to Geula, redemption. And that's my wrap.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi Bigler. That was really beyond inspiring. So now we'll have a little opportunity for Q&A. What I think is going to be easy is if people have any questions for Rabbi Bigler on what he just spoke about or anything about Judaism in particular, put it in the chat and I'll pick a few questions and we'll do them. And while you do that, I came up with one question that I'm really struggling with, and so I'll just put that one out as other people put theirs out, and that is just that it's not what you talked about, but I think it's very relevant today, and that is, as we all know, anti-Semitism is on the rise today, and I'm just wondering from your perspective why you think that is. Is it really on the rise, or we're just more aware of it? And what can we really do on a day-to-day practical level?
Wow. Okay, I'm going to answer you as a rabbi. I'm going to give you a spiritual answer. The Torah tells us exactly why anti-Semitism is going to happen. The Torah called it 4,000 years ago. When our patriarch, Jacob was a twin brother to Esau, who is the first anti-Semite of history. So Jacob and Esau were two brothers, twin brothers. Esau is the father of the Christians, and Jacob is the father of the Jews. Esau was trying to kill Jacob. Why? Why did Esau hate Jacob? There's a beautiful story in Genesis about how Jacob stole the blessings that Isaac, their father, wanted to give to Esau. That's a long story. It's a whole different topic about why he stole the blessings. Big topic, big conversation. But when Jacob received all the blessings and Esau realized that he had missed out, that the blessings had been taken, Esau asks his father, Isaac, in tears, Dad, is there not one blessing that you can give me? No, not even one blessing left. And here the Torah tells us that Isaac tells Esau as follows: listen, I made him a master over you. There's nothing I can do anymore. However, there is one caveat. And it shall be when he rejects the yoke of Judaism. When Jacob stops to act like Jacob, when Jacob forgets that he's a Jew, then you will have the right to be able to rise up and prevail over him. In other words, what the Torah is telling us is that Isaac allowed Esau to succeed in his anti-Semitism over Jacob in order to remind Jacob that he needs to be a Jew. The purpose of anti-Semitism, this might not be a popular thing for me to say, I've got to be careful, but anti-Semitism is essentially, and this is the way it's taught in Jewish mysticism, is God sending us a wake-up call. I want you to think about what Judaism would look like today if we never experienced anti-Semitism in our history. What do you think would have happened? What do you say, Gail? What do you think?
I think we wouldn't have many identifiable Jews left.
I think we would have assimilated. We would have very, very easily. Sorry, what was that? Assimilation, exactly. We would have just disappeared. But you know what happens October 7th? Before October 7th, I mean, we thought that the blood libel, you know what the blood libel is? When they accuse the Jews of slaughtering Christians and eating their blood and matzahs, we thought that was something which came from the ancient past. You'd find the blood libel in the history section, right? Or in the fiction section of the library. But today they're accusing us of being baby killers. Today they're accusing us of infanticide, of genocide. They're accusing us of the most god-awful, unthinkable atrocities. And that's not just coming from those who hate us. It's coming from the very same college campuses which bear our family names because we gave them 8-digit gifts to endow the Goldberg family auditorium and the Goldstein family campus, right? This is coming from governments and institutions that we felt safe in. And now what's happening is that we Jews have no choice but to realize, to reassess who our friends really are. I want to tell you something else, Gail. In the story of Tziklag, of King David, one of the great commentaries of the Torah asks, why did God do this? That David's family was taken hostage. And the families of his 600 men. Why did God need to do this? That he caused David such trauma, and in a deeply, profoundly moving response, a response which I have to admit to you, I struggle with myself. The commentary explains that God created this challenge for David to force David to dig so deep within his psyche, within his soul, to search in the very depths of his faith, to be able to discover the degree of trust that David needed to uncover in order to become the sweet singer of Israel and the eternal monarch of our nation. In other words, what it means is that God gives us the challenges we face in order to force us to bring out the best in us. And I'm not the first one to say this, I must admit. It was Isaiah, the prophet, Yeshayahu, who says that why is it that he compares the Jewish people to an olive? Why is it that the Jewish people are compared to an olive? Because an olive, was that somebody giving an answer? Because an olive only produces its finest oil when squeezed. In exactly the same way, the Jewish people only produce their finest contributions when they're facing struggle. I mean, think about it. Think about how it works in business. If you didn't have a competitor, if you didn't have a competition, how effective would you really be in business if you didn't have a worthy rival, right? God created the world in such a way that every company that's successful has a rival. I mean, think about it: BMW and Mercedes-Benz, Apple and Samsung, United States and China. Any company you could possibly think of, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, there's always a rival. But if you don't have a rival, then you're living in a communist culture. You're living in a place like Russia, where there's the postal service is a 50-50 toss-up. Maybe it's gonna mail will arrive, maybe it won't. In America, you got UPS and FedEx and DHL and the US Postal Service. That's why you know that your mail is gonna arrive, because there's competition. But if there wasn't any struggle, if there wasn't any competition, we just rest on our laurels and we'd be relaxed. It's the challenges in our life that force us to squeeze out the best in us. How do you
Thank
feel
you.
about that, Gail?
Yeah, it's a great answer. I mean, it's a tough answer, but it's the truth, and the
It's
truth
incredibly
covers.
challenging. It's incredibly challenging because it's very painful to think about. And the best analogy I can think of is of a child looking up at his mother and saying, why would you put me through such trouble? Why would you torture me to send me to school? Like, you know that I don't like school. So why would you torture me? And the mother can only look at the child and say, I hope one day you'll understand that this is essentially an act of love. Because you know what? If you stay at home all day, you might end up being a lazy tuchus for the rest of your life. But it's by going to school and facing the bullies on the schoolyard, and by facing your teachers that you don't like, and maybe the teachers that don't like you, the ones that give you a hard time, that's what's going to make you into a mensch. Otherwise, you're just going to stay a garnished.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to throw out a Rosh Hashanah question. So it says that on Rosh Hashanah, it's the day of judgment, and that brings to mind, does that mean that God is a judgmental God? In that, is he literally, looking at every sin that I did and, trying to find a way to punish me? Or is he a God that just loves us exactly as we are? And if that's the case, then why is it called the day of judgment? So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about what does that mean, judgment, and what's your conception of God?
I think that your question is very valid for people that are just a very superficial reading of the Bible, you're like, why would anybody want to worship a God that seems to be so jealous, so insecure, and he suffers from amnesia, which is why we have to pray to him 3 times a day, and he can't remember what I asked him for yesterday or last week, and somehow I've got to try to remember, I've got to be able to worship this God. It doesn't even make any sense. But the depth of the answer is so meaningful, it's so personal, it's so beautiful. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we read in the pinnacle prayer of the day in Unesan Tokef, it says that as we pass by God in judgment, it says that the verdict is written in our own handwriting. Isn't that an interesting expression to say in our prayers? That the verdict is written in our own handwriting? What could that possibly even mean? The answer, the reason is because Ethics of the Fathers tells us that a person needs to know where they come from, where they're going, and before, this is the critical part, I'm going to keep it short. We need to know before whom we are destined to give a verdict and a testimony. This is what it says in the oral Torah, in the Mishnah, Ethics of the Fathers. We need to know, always remember, before whom we're destined to give a verdict and a testimony before God. Now, where do you give a verdict before the testimony? Normally, the testimony comes before the verdict, right? You would think. The only place to give a verdict before the testimony is in a totalitarian regime like North Korea or Iran or a communist country like Russia, maybe. That's where you'd get the testimony after the verdict. But why would God be giving us the verdict before the testimony? The answer is, our sages explain, that God treats us exactly the way that we treat him. The mirror doctrine we just spoke about. When you are kind to other people, when somebody asks you for charity and you know that they don't deserve it, what's your reaction? What's your reaction? So some of us will say, oh, I'm not going to give that guy, go get a job. But if you're able to give kindness, charity to the undeserving, you know what that does? It forces God to do the same for you because of the mirror doctrine. So when I stand before God in judgment and I have given others that were undeserving, then God has no choice but to say, listen, it doesn't matter what David deserves or not. I've got to give it to him because he gives to the undeserving. When we are tight-fisted with others, then God is tight-fisted with us. When we are generous with others, then God is generous with us as well. And that's the reason why the verdict comes before the testimony when we reach the heavenly court. Because by the time we hit the gates of heaven, the pearly gates, our verdict is already decided because it depends on how we lived our lives. If we lived our lives in a way that we were making space for others, giving others the benefit of the doubt, then God does the same for us. But if we were strict and cruel and unforgiving, then God does the same for us. And that's what I want to tell you. If you can think of someone in your life right now that you should love, but you don't like, we all know people like this. Somebody that's like, could be a brother, could be a sister-in-law, could be a child, could be a parent. Someone you should love, but you just don't like them at all because they're just awful. I want to encourage you to consider that maybe that person is in your life as a gift from God. Because when you muster the mettle to overcome your distaste for that person and to make the choice to like them even though they don't deserve your liking, that you can be kind to them even if you don't agree with their behavior, that you can give them the benefit of the doubt even whilst you don't condone their inappropriate behavior. When you're doing that, you are setting yourself up for Yom Kippur in 7 days' time to stand before God where you're twisting God's arm to force God to give you a year which is K'tiva v'chatima tova, Shana tova u'metuka, a year in which God is giving you over-the-top blessings, even though you don't deserve them, where God might say, I love this kid, but I don't like them because they haven't really done what I wanted them to do. But because you treated others that way, in these 7 days, you're forcing God to do the same for you. And that, Gail, is how I understand the judgment of Rosh Hashanah. In the most compassionate, exact, precision judgment where God judges us exactly the way we judge others. And that is why our verdict on Yom Kippur is written in our own handwriting.
Beautiful, beautiful. Um, Unless somebody has another question, I'll ask one more. It'll be our last question. So I don't see any more in the chat. Um, can you tell us a little bit, because I think a lot of people don't know, what is Chabad, as opposed to, like, most of us know, like, there's, Hasidic and ultra Orthodox and modern Orthodox and Reform and conservative, and we have a hodgepodge of everything here, and a compass, everyone's welcome. But I think sometimes it's nice for people to just understand what is Chabad, how is it, perhaps is it different than other sects of Judaism?
So thank you for that question. Chabad is not a denomination of Judaism. It's not like Reform, conservative, reconstructionist, humanist. Chabad, it's not. It's not a denomination. Chabad is a philosophy. It's a movement. Because the meaning of the word Chabad, it's actually an acronym for three Hebrew words, which are the three steps of intellectual processing. Chochmah Bina Das is the acronym of Chabad, which means conception, and when you conceive an idea, when you understand the idea, and then when you feel the idea through meditation. You have a question, gives birth to a conceived solution. Then you reflect on it and you expand, you understand the idea. But after you understand an idea, you now want to meditate on it, so you start to feel it in your heart. That is the meaning of Chabad. Chabad means logic. It is a rational approach to faith. Now that sounds like a paradox, because faith is essentially super rational. Faith is something which we don't understand. Faith is something which we don't grasp. Chabad is a relentless intellectual attack on faith. Whereas 100 years ago, our parents might have been okay when their teacher and cheder told them that you have to lay tefillin. Today, we want to know, well, why do we lay tefillin? They tell us that, they told us that you have to light Shabbos candles before a certain time. Well, what's the meaning of Shabbos candles? And why does it have to be at a certain time? And why is it only the women and not the men? And all these myriads of questions. Chabad is a philosophy drawn from Jewish mystical teachings, which were hidden from the public eye for thousands of years. And only in the past 300 years, not even 250 years or so, since 1734. Since 1734, the teachings of Jewish mysticism have been shared with all of mankind, not only Jews, by the way, even Gentiles, to share with them the secrets of mysticism so that they can appreciate their faith, so that they can appreciate who God is and what God wants from us and where God factors in our lives to make our lives so much more meaningful, so much more filled with color and life. That's why I look at my faith as like therapy, because we go to our rabbi for meaningless information, but we go to our therapy when it actually matters, right? If your faith is not touching your heart, if it's not deeply meaningful, if it doesn't excite you, then you're not doing it right. And that's where Chabad fits in. Chabad, this approach, you need a good rabbi who's able to connect with you and to share ancient mysticism in modern times. And if you can connect with your rabbi or rebbetz in your local Chabad in a way that they can share with you ancient, timeless wisdom in modern day conundrums, now you'll be illuminating your life like LeDavid Ori, like the light of Rosh Hashanah, to make it a year like you've never had before.
Thank you. We did get one more question, and I'm only going to post it because I think it is an important one, and we will end with that. And that is, somebody's asking, how do you respond to the left pro-Palestinian, pro-Mamdani, the New York City mayoral candidate, and some of the Israelis that are in our midst? Like, what do you say to them to maybe get them to see the light?
So we spoke about the anti-Semites and the reason behind them. But this is a very insightful question about how to handle self-hating Jews. How do you handle the Jews that don't want to stand for themselves? I think that these Jews are desperate for a cause. As Jews, we've always been at the forefront of all the revolutions of history. When you study the revolutions, you realize that it was always Jews at the forefront, because Jews are looking for a cause, because we have this burning fire within us. We have the soul raging within us, and that's why when we don't have the proper values, we need to manifest our desire for change by counter-establishment, by counterculture, like Mamdani, where we try to say, well, we're going to do things very, very, very different. The response to these Jews, I believe, is infusing them with a profound and meaningful connection to their Jewish identity by inviting them over for a Shabbos dinner to your table. Show them the beauty of Shabbos. Have them experience the inspiration of a Torah idea. Have them light a Shabbos candle, lay tefillin with them. When they're able to experience the holiness of a Jewish experience, their soul, which is in a coma inside of them, their godly soul, their Jewish soul, which is comatose inside of them, will experience a moment of arousal. And slowly but surely, they'll be able to awaken the sleeping lion within them to realize how absurd and ridiculous the efforts that they're trying to do by channeling their efforts into greener pastures, when they don't realize that what they really need to do is to express their Judaism. We had a general from the IDF from Gaza here a few days ago, came to speak at Ashul. And what he said was, he said, you know what the biggest problem facing the Jewish people today? The biggest problem is not Hamas, it's not Hezbollah, it's not even Iran. The biggest problem facing the Jewish people today is Jews who don't respect Judaism. That's our biggest problem. When we don't respect ourselves, thank you. When we don't respect ourselves, then how on earth can we possibly expect anybody else to respect us? When we don't believe that we're the chosen people, when we don't believe in the promised land, there's only one country in the world that's called the promised land. Every other country in the world, America included, is the conquered land. We, the Jewish people, are the only country that is promised by the master of the universe to give us that piece of real estate. When we don't believe in our right to the promised land, how on earth do we expect anybody else to accept our right to believe that we're the chosen people, or to believe in our right to the promised land? When the Gentiles of the world, they're good people. Gentiles have no respect for Jews who don't respect themselves. But Gentiles have every respect for Jews who do respect themselves. And that is my answer.
That was a great
Thank
answer.
you. Yeah, thank you so, so much. For those of you who don't know, Rabbi Bigler is also fasting today because today is a Jewish fast day. So it's
Fast
incredible that you have that
Kadila.
kind of energy. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us. And if you want to, Rabbi Bigler has a YouTube channel. So if you want to hear more about his wisdom, you can always go on YouTube and subscribe to his channel and hear Jewish wisdom on a daily basis.
I'd like
Thank
to
you
encourage
so
you to
much.
follow me on. I'd like to encourage you to follow me on YouTube. It's at Jewish Gardens. That's Jewish. Just search Jewish Gardens on YouTube. But even better, I want to encourage you to go to Instagram and to follow my wife. She is a class act, a master class in Jewish style and flair. If you go to Instagram, go to Judaism in Style. That's Judaism in Style, and follow Hannah Vigler. She's the secret sauce behind what's going on here in the Chabad movement.
You're both wonderful people, both of you. You each contribute in your own way. Elvin, do you have any parting words?
Sure. That was fantastic, Rabbi. Thank you so much for imparting all your wisdom. I think that you gave us a lot to consider, especially during these holiest of days, and that we have a lot to think about. And hopefully it inspired everyone to take that into consideration. And it will help us become better Jews, better business people, better Americans, better humans to each other. And I think that hopefully everyone will follow you on YouTube, because obviously you have some really great teachings and a lot of great things to say. So we're blessed to have you today, especially while you're fasting, to be so generous with your time and your words and your message. So thank you so much. Shana Tova, everyone. If I don't see you, I hope everyone has a meaningful and easy fast. May you be inscribed in the book of life. Thank you for taking time today to be with us. And once again, we are doing an October 7th commemoration. It'll be an opportunity for everyone to be together, for our people to lean on each other, to support each other in a time of remembrance, but also to know that people are still fighting for the promised land, and it'll help inspire us to get involved if that is how we are called, but also to learn about people who are actively out in the field, on the field, and in supporting roles, and what they're doing, and learn more about what's going on 2 years in, and hopefully if there is an end in sight. And again, I'm sure there are many people who share the frustration that I have, where we feel helpless. We feel that we need something to do, to help heal the world, which is what we're called to do as Jews. And little by little, hopefully we can find some answers to that, to help with Tikkun Olam, which is a really important overarching goal for us as Jewish people. So thanks again for joining us. Good seeing everyone.
Shana
Shana
Tova. Thank
Shana.
you.
Lots of everyone.
Thank you. It's a
Tova.
pleasure.
Shana
God bless you
Tova.
all.